Look, let me preface this next story by saying I have no sympathy for anyone done drink or drug driving. You get caught, you pay the penalty, but it's the penalties that are the issue here. Now, the Palaszczuk government is looking at changes, possible changes to our drink driving laws. One element in particular, restricted licences or work licences. Now, as I mentioned at the top of the show, and I reckon we've all been there, pulled up at a breath test and you think, well, how much did I have the night before? And then it goes through your mind, what if I'll be all right to get to work because there are restricted licences. It's okay. If I'm just a little bit over, it should be right. That's the wrong message though, isn't it? To have that as a carrot dangling to you. Shouldn't it be a deterrent? Isn't that what a penalty is all about? Not to have that she'll be right when it comes to drink driving. The flip side though is the punishment. Would that then far outweigh the crime if you are restricted from driving, if you're not allowed to go to work? And then not only is there the fine you have to pay, but there is also the financial penalty for however long your licence is suspended. Really interesting piece written today in the Courier Mail by my next guest, Andrew Wiseman. He is a Brisbane lawyer. He specialises in traffic and driving related matters. Andrew, afternoon.
Afternoon, Ben.
Work licences, are they really on the rack as far as Queensland is concerned?
Look, the government put out a discussion paper, so there's nothing, I guess, hard and fast as far as outcomes of that at this stage. But again, as I said, the discussion paper was put out there, the time frame during which people could respond since passed, and nothing more has been said on the matter. So I guess we're still waiting for a response, but I guess it's a waiting game at the moment.
You raised some really interesting points in your article today about how you can have two different people in two different situations in Queensland. They may commit the same crime, but the penalties would have a far different effect on each of them.
Well, that's correct. That's correct. People talk about an equal application of justice, but what punishes one person doesn't necessarily punish the other, and what doesn't punish the other will grossly punish another person. So I guess if you're looking at a line of vehicles at a booze bus, the guy in the ute who tips over will lose everything, whereas the guy in the expensive vehicle may just think, oh, this is another bill to put on the tab and laugh it off. And how is that really justice?
Yeah, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. So when it comes to those who need their vehicle, be it a courier driver or a tradie, that's where the restricted work licence comes into it. Now, Queensland is one of the only that has restricted work licences. And I know you drew the comparison to New South Wales. I had no idea it was a different system down there.
Yeah, look, each state's different. Some states have them, some don't. But the discussion paper that I referred to earlier makes a lot of the fact that New South Wales doesn't have work licences, but the reason being they don't need them, because magistrates, unlike in Queensland, aren't compelled to disqualify a person's licence. You go to court in Queensland and I, as a solicitor, can bring the magistrate to tears, but they've got no choice but to take that person's licence off them, whereas in New South Wales, they've got what's called a Section 10, meaning the magistrate can absolutely release a person, effectively throwing the charge out, and they're most certainly not compelled to disqualify. So the reason that there's no work licence legislation in New South Wales is because they don't need it.
Some might say a mandatory disqualification of licence, but then there are exceptions to this where you can get a restricted work licence. Does that water down the laws, does that water down the penalties we have here in Queensland?
No, it doesn't. And if I can just make the point also, another key element that's always kept quiet on when people talk down these laws, when a person gets work licence, the magistrate has the power, and more often than not exercises that power to double what they'd otherwise get. So if a person goes to court and they ordinarily get a 6-month disqualification, and the next person with exactly the same reading, given that they will lose their job, applies for a work licence, will generally end up with a 12-month disqualification. So if you can imagine cutting an orange in half, the two sides sit side by side, and now the orange is twice the length.
Yeah.
And that's the point that time and time again is overlooked when people talk about treating everyone the same, etc. At the end of the day, the time off the road is the same. It's just been spread out over a longer period.
Are our drink driving penalties and our laws here in Queensland, are they successful? Are they doing it right? I would suggest by the amount of figures that we saw over the Easter break that they are, because they are reducing. Out of 68,000 tested, only 286 or 200 odd blew over 0.05.
Look, the reason I have to spend so much money on advertising is because there's very little repeat business, and that's a good thing. People make the mistake, they deal with it appropriately and get on with their life, and a lot of the time they're never to be seen again. That's not to say there aren't repeat offenders, but again, another point that's constantly overlooked is repeat offenders don't get work licences, and if someone does get a work licence and they breach the terms, they lose it and get 3 months added on. So I guess without going off point, a lot of the intent of this discussion paper is already addressed in the current system. It's just that people want to look at the current system through their own interpretation rather than the reality, or rather than talking to people like me or magistrates about it, or the police.
If it ain't break, don't fix it, I reckon. Andrew, thank you for your time, mate. It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Andrew Wiseman there from Wiseman Lawyers. The restricted work licence, I haven't had a necessity for it, so I'm not speaking from any authority of having been there. If you've been on one, is it still a big enough deterrent when it comes to drink driving? What about drug driving? It's another issue that we're facing right now. Should the licences be mandatory suspended if there's drug driving involved? 131873, does the punishment fit the crime as far as this? Is it a big enough deterrent? Because in the back of our mind, if we know that we can get a work licence, is it really the deterrent